Hello everyone, on today's video we're going to be taking a look at the TBM930. The TBM930 is a single-engine turboprop plane. It's basically a really high-end sports car. You can use it for general business use, you can use it for personal use. It has the capability to take off and land on relatively short runways, and it's got a very good cruise speed, very modern avionics, and it's a slick package overall. I actually find myself flying this one quite a bit. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get ourselves started here. So first things first, for this aircraft, did a lot of poking around the internet to try to see if I could find any really good resources, and I actually was able to locate the actual POH used for this aircraft. This checklist, by the way, I have available in the comment section below. But there's another really good resource I found for that, and that's this really cool website called POH Performance. Now, I don't get any money from these guys, but I just thought I'd show this to you because it gives you the ability to actually, in advance, basically go ahead and make all your calculations as far as performance goes pretty much instantaneously. You know, I can put in pretty much any runway airport that I wanted to do, and it will tell me how much fuel I'm going to use. It's going to tell me exactly how much runway I'm going to consume. Everything built in. It'll even tell me all the critical speeds, like my obstacle clearance speeds, my climb speeds, absolutely everything I want. You know, I could go over to destination, for example, and I could go ahead and take a look at what my approach speed is, and it looks like it's going to be about 85 knots today. And that's just a really slick tool. Again, like I said, they don't pay me anything. I'm just trying to help you folks out as far as making your life a little bit simpler. So let's go ahead and go back to our little checklist here real quick, and let's take a look at what we're really looking at here. Basically, all this stuff up here is going to be what you're going to be doing before you actually get the aircraft itself started. Down here is kind of the critical components. If you skip these, we're not going to have much of an airplane to be going. We have all the information about the starting itself, the after start, the avionics, everything. We'll go ahead and work our way through it. I'm not going to alternate back and forth between these two checklists so that you can kind of see things as they kind of go. So let's go ahead and put that away for now, and let's get this thing rolling. So first thing we need to do is we need to make sure all of our weight and balance is set. Oh, by the way, for those of you who are trying to figure out exactly where we are today, we are in the middle of Egypt, and we're going to be flying up to Cairo International Airport. It's about 70 nautical mile distance. It's going to take us about 20 minutes or so to get there. So let's go ahead and pop back inside and go right through it. So we've set our weather, we've set our flight plan, we've set our weight and balance. We want to double check to make sure our landing gear handle is in the down position. If you prove that it's in the up position, we want to make sure that it's in the down position. Obviously, you don't want to be messing with that by accident. Next, what we want to do is we want to confirm that we have our oxygen turned on. Oxygen switch is impossible to find. That's actually your mic switch. The oxygen switch on this particular aircraft, I'm just trying to remember, is directly above my head. I always get them confused between the other one. And you can actually deploy oxygen masks if you choose to do so. It's kind of cool. All right, we want to make sure all of our lights are off. Lights in this aircraft are located directly above our head. That's going to be these switches here. We're then going to go ahead and make sure the crash lever, which is this little bar right here, is in the down position, which it is. Now we're going to go over to the starter. We're going to make sure it's off. I can't tell you how many times I've accidentally clicked this during this. We want to go ahead and take a look at our ignition. Our ignition at this point should be set to auto, which it is. Our fuel pump should be off. Our auxiliary fuel pump should be set to the man position, I should say off. Our fuel selector should be set to the man position. Autopilots and trim should be off. Our ELT should be off as well. Now we'll go ahead and take a look at the rest of the controls. We now have our air conditioning system. We're going to make sure that's all off. You also have a second set all the way down there that we can worry about later on. We have a bunch of different switches for those, but we'll deal with those in just a minute. We also want to double check to make sure the throttle. This particular aircraft has a single throttle power lever. It's a little different than especially the previous editions of this particular aircraft. So now that that's taken care of, we're going to go check to make sure our park and brake is set, which is this little switch right here, and we're pretty much good to go. Normally now what we do is conduct our passenger briefing. We'd explain to our passengers where we're going, on your safety procedures, your responsibilities as a passenger, all that other good stuff. We'd make sure our charts and procedures are available, and then it's time to get this thing rolling. So I'm going to go up here. I'm going to take the crash bar. I'm going to slam it to the up position, which just means now that we can access our two switches right here, which is going to be very important. We can go to our source. We have two switches. We have one for battery, one for GPU. I'm just going to flip it onto the battery setting, keep it simple. My generator, I'm going to go ahead and flip it to the main generator setting. Now, normally at this point, you'd want to test all your alarms and lights and things like that. I'm not going to worry about that too much, but we are going to test to make sure our landing gear lights are working. To do that, we just press and hold this button. It gets all angry and flashy at us, telling us that those lights do work correctly. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to double check to make sure we have enough voltage. Unfortunately, we can't see that until we open up the screen. You can see we're hovering right at 24 volts. That's actually a little low. We want 24.5, but this particular display only rounds down, so I'm not worried about it too much. We then want to check our CAS messages. This is our CAS. It looks like everything's good. Notice our bleed is in the off position. Notice auto cell is yellow. That's going to be coming back to us a little bit later on. And of course, we want to make sure our lights are set correctly. So I'm going to come up here, flip on the nav light. That's literally all you have to worry about as far as lights goes at this time. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get this thing started. So there's really not a lot to actually starting a turboprop. We're just going to make sure our ignition's in the auto position. We're going to flip on our auxiliary boost pump. You're going to get an angry message right here that's going to tell us that the aux boost pump is on, which means it worked correctly. That's a good thing for us. Next thing what we're going to do is we're going to make sure the propeller area is clear. Could you stand to the side, sir? Sir? Excuse me. Well, his fault for standing so close to it, I guess. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click the starter switch for 2 seconds. And then as soon as we do that, we're going to monitor our NG, which is this little gauge right here. The moment it says 13, we're going to gently push this up into the low position. Now, this is a funky switch, and I'll talk about this in just a minute, especially depending on how your controls are set up. Let's go ahead and do it. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, release. And now the starter is engaged. So the first thing we're going to see is you're going to see an increase in NG almost immediately. Once that gets up to 13%, we're going to go ahead and gently push this forward. All right, let's do it. Pull it out of the cutoff position, and now we're going to start getting an acceleration. All right, you want to closely monitor ITT. You want to closely monitor everything else, your propeller RPM, and just kind of keep an eye on things as we kind of go here. Again, you're going to get all sorts of angry warnings here during this process, but don't worry about it too much. All right, NG, we are now working at a very, very low idle. This is called ground idle. I'm going to go ahead and push this up to high idle. There we go. And now the engine should accelerate the rest of the way. Our ITT should come down because we reduced our load a bit, and everything should stabilize quite nicely, and we are good to go. Excellent. So now we want to double check to make sure we have enough RPM, which we do, and we're going to go ahead and leave it in this position. Now here's where things get a little quirky. If you have a propeller handle on your particular throttle at home, you'll notice if you drop that throttle to 0, you can actually slap it all the way down to low idle. If you push it all the way forward, you can tap it all the way back up here. Normally with turboprops, you have a really, really neat ability where you could actually cycle between these two positions in order to control your taxiing speed rather than just pushing the handle forward on its own. That's called your beta range for those of you who have checked that out before, or high idle and low idle, depending exactly what you're trying to do. But unfortunately for us, unless we pull the propeller control all the way back, we really don't get much of a control like you would expect to. It's just a kind of neat little quirk, and I know there are mods in the Flight Simulator forum that change a lot of this for you. Okay, let's go ahead and get everything else cleaned up here. I'm going to go up to aux boost pump, set this to the auto position. We're going to go ahead and check the fuel selector to the auto position. Now this is crazy, but the fuel system on here works just the same way that you're probably used to like on a Cherokee. The difference is there's actually a computer that will switch this tank position as we fly. As a matter of fact, if you push this button real quick, it'll actually snap the fuel selector to the other position. This will actually cycle automatically to make sure that we're using fuel equally from both sides of the aircraft. I think it's a really slick trick, but this switch has got to be set to auto. All right, our generator is already in the on position. If you needed to reset, we could reset them up here. Don't need to worry about that right now. We're going to go double check the CAS. We probably have a bunch of angry messages still. Notice our bleed is in the off position. That's something we're going to want to fix in just a moment. But we usually wait until we're just about ready to take off before we're going to turn on our bleed. Again, bleed just sucks air away from the actual turboprop itself, or I should say the gas turbine section, and gives us a little bit of air for pressurization. We go ahead and turn on autopilot and trim. A lot of people forget to hit this switch, and they wonder why their automatic pilot does not work. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and set our information on our actual aircraft itself. Go ahead and take a look real quickly. We've got all of our, this is a G3000 setup, so we've got all the different information that we need basically located down here. We can go to our PVFD, we can go to our MFD, we can come down to our navigation comm. For us, we need to make sure we go ahead and turn on our transponder. It's already been turned on. You can see it's set to this. If we were in the States, of course, we'd be doing something like that if we wanted to. You can also just bop that particular button as well. Once you're all set with that, then we go ahead and do set us real quickly like that. And press the enter key, boop, and now it goes ahead and sets. Now everything is ready to go. We're going to go ahead and set our lights. Obviously, we don't have a situation where we need to worry about lights because it's nice and high visibility today, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. My instruments have already been set. We're about 1,000 feet above sea level. And now it's time to set up our avionics. For the most part, this aircraft is going to be flying using the automatic pilot just about all the time. The first thing I usually do, and again, everybody's going to be a little bit different, is we're going to want to set our top altitude. In this case, depending on what air traffic control gives us, is going to set what this is. For us, it's going to be 5,500 feet today. Next thing, what we usually like to do is we like to go to the vertical speed button, which is the one that says VS. We can turn that off. Nothing bad will happen, don't worry. And then we can set this to just about 1,200 feet per minute is what it recommends in the POH. This is pretty good, although a lot of times I'll do a flight level climb during this one as well. The other thing you can do too is you can do what they call an FLC, so that's going to be flight level climb. If I click that button, we can then define the speed that we want to climb at, which for some folks works a little bit better. It really depends on how nasty it is outside. Usually for climbing speed, you can go for pretty much any speed between 110 and 150 safely. 110 is certainly going to get you up to altitude very quickly, but you're also going to be climbing at an extremely steep angle. So generally when I climb with this particular aircraft, I usually aim around 125, 130. You can again use whatever you need based on what the book itself says. And again, pick what works for you. Heading, usually I set to runway heading. I'm not going to do that until I get to the runway itself. Course, I'm not going to worry about, but what I am going to worry about is the fact that if you look at my display here, it says VOR1, which means if I want to travel via the navigation routes I've selected, we need to change this mode. If we don't change this mode, like I said, we're going to be in trouble. So I'm going to come down here and press our PFD settings. And you can see here we've got all the different stuff. We have information with AOA. Of course, I always like to flip my window on like that really, really quickly. Go back, come over down to my PFD screen, and we have this button that says Nav Source. I'm just going to set this FMS so that we're getting data directly from the GPS for actual flight here. Okay, avionics are looking good. We normally get clearance, release the parking brake. We can turn on our pitot heat now because we're about to get rolling. Make sure there's 2 switches for those. Of course, since this is the scary desert of Egypt, it's not that scary really. We do want to turn our inertial separator on. That's basically a gigantic air filter for our turboprop to make sure everything's nice and safe. We want to make sure our stall heat is on. Our ignition should be in on position. Taxi light should be set. Taxi, you just come up here and flip that switch like that. We also want to double check to make sure our bleed system is turned on. I would like to put that to auto and leave it alone. And now you can see from our CAS that everything has been shut off because we've got basically clipped everything that we need to clip. All right, let's go ahead and get this thing rolling. So I'm going to release the parking brake. Give myself just a teeny tiny bit of thrust here. It does not take much to get this thing rolling. There we go. Now, unfortunately for us, where we park this thing, we have to basically do a little bushwhacking in order to get over to where we actually want to be taken off from. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the control back, and I'm going to be very, very cautious not to give ourselves too much thrust. Obviously, give yourself enough thrust to not get stuck in the dirt, but at the same time, don't give yourself too much thrust because then you're going to end up sucking all sorts of nastiness into that very expensive composite propeller. You can see if I had the ability to turn around a little bit better, I could have just whipped around, but that's perfectly fine for me. All right, nice. Taxiing this thing on the ground is pretty straightforward. You're just going to drive it just like you would normally do. The front wheel on this thing is not what I would consider the most strong as far as getting you around in a hurry. So make sure you give yourself plenty of room in order to turn this aircraft around. Go ahead and push myself the rest of the way. You can see we're approaching our little runway, basically straight ahead. Looks like somebody else is taking off right now. I'm not sure where that particular gentleman is going. I believe that's an AI. Interesting. All right, we'll go get ourselves ready. So for takeoff in this aircraft, it's very simple. The only thing that complicates matters is going to be because we're using a turboprop. Because we're using a turboprop, when we give this thing full throttle, it takes a pretty significant amount of time for it to get up to the RPM that we want it to actually get up to. So as a result, we have to kind of watch ourselves with that. So we already have an individual on the runway itself, so we're getting blocked here, which is funny because I disabled all traffic. So I'm just going to kind of wait for that chap to take off. Looks like he took off successfully. Go ahead and check the approach just to make sure. And it looks pretty good. All right, let's get going. So once we get on the runway, of course, we want to go ahead and flip on our runway landing light, which is going to be that switch right there. And then we're just going to line ourselves up at the end. With this particular aircraft, I usually prefer to hold down the brakes and basically always do a short field style takeoff just for my own sanity. Now, some of you are probably going, well, why did you not turn on the yaw damper? With this aircraft, we don't turn on the yaw damper until we've gotten enough altitude to actually safely go ahead and fly. We're going to leave the inertial separator on here because, again, I don't want to be sucking dust into my actual engine. So it looks like we're going to be having a bit of a game here. Somebody's coming directly at me, which is interesting because I disabled most of that before I got started, but it looks like he's going to pull off at the last second there. Okay, let's go ahead and get this thing rolling. So we're going to go ahead and use 100% of our torque. Now on a turboprop, you have a couple different things you have to worry about. The first one is not twisting the engine too hard. The next one is not exceeding your maximum RPM of the propeller. Then there's not exceeding maximum RPM of the free turbine. And then there's not exceeding your maximum temperature as well as, usual oil pressure and temperature. So you have to make sure when you do any changes that you give the engine plenty of time to respond because that thing is spinning so fast. So I'm just going to go ahead and smoothly push the throttle forward. You're going to see that everything starts coming up pretty much right away. Go ahead and continue smoothly pushing it forward. Watch that ITT. Do you see how it's just about to peak? There it goes, and now you're right into the red. So today's maximum takeoff power is about 75%. So go ahead and release the throttle, the brakes, and we're going to go ahead and get ourselves rushing down this runway. Now, if I continue to accelerate past that point, of course, we'd have a bigger problem because the engine would slowly overheat on us. You can see now that we've been rolling that we have the ability to go ahead and increase that throttle just a teeny tiny bit more and get even more torque out of the engine. So really, this is quite a process to get this thing safely airborne. And again, it's one of those things where it's really nice when you have a co-pilot who can kind of read into your ear what you're doing. Rotation speed is going to be right in the mid-80s. There we go. And we get going up. Now, the manual on this aircraft says we shouldn't raise our gear until we get to 110. Gear up. And of course, if we chose to use flaps for takeoff, which we certainly could have, we would want to go ahead and make sure those are also brought up before we exceed 120 knots. So I'm going to go ahead and start my gentle climb here. Now, the first thing most of you are going to notice with this aircraft is just how incredibly quickly this thing accelerates. Like, I'm not working the controls at all, and off it goes. We're getting a pretty good amount of turbulence this morning. Once you get clear of anything on the ground, of course, you can go ahead and flip off your inertial separator. And for us, we're also going to go ahead and flip off our lights because we don't need them right now. Now, if you remember earlier, I was mentioning the fact that we can climb at a speed of 110 knots. Now, if we chose to do that, imagine how steep the nose of this aircraft would have to be in order to do that safely. Let's go ahead and take a look at our system, our settings right now. You can see our ITT is pretty high, and our torque is climbing. Now, anybody who knows anything about turboprops will tell you as the aircraft gets higher, your torque amount decreases. For whatever reason, in this particular version of Flight Simulator, it chooses to go ahead and operate it in that fashion. So as you climb, you have to actually gently pull the throttle backwards in order to prevent yourself from over-torquing the aircraft. That's just not how that works normally. But unfortunately, in this version, and again, this is almost November of 2020, this could change with time, and it can improve that quite a bit. But right now, I'm just getting everybody kind of a heads up. All right, we got ourselves doing about 150 knots here, which is incredible for an aircraft of this size. And I'm going to go ahead and get ourselves nice and lined up with our little cruise position here. Again, very gentle corrections with this aircraft. This aircraft is a lot of airplane. It's also a very, very expensive airplane. All right, looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get ourselves up to altitude here. Generally, when you're flying again with this aircraft, feel free to use the automatic pilot all you'd like to. I find the automatic pilot in this aircraft to be a little too slow is really what I'm going to call it. Looking pretty good. All right, I'm going to start leveling ourselves off in just a moment. Again, you want to start leveling off about 100 feet before you actually get to that leveling position. Remember, watch out for that throttle setting. Like, I'm looking at my torque right now, and I'm pushing 106%, which is so weird because the air has actually gotten thinner since we've climbed. Whoop, we've overshot our thing here. I was paying way too much attention to that, but that kind of thing happens all the time. And just a little bit more. Go ahead and flip on the automatic pilot. And now we can go ahead and flip on our yaw damper as well. And we are good to go. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get our engine set up for cruise. It's very, very simple. You're simply going to make sure this is at 100. You're going to make sure this is at 2000. This is not past the red line, and this is not past the red line, which means we are now at our cruise condition. It is actually possible to fly this aircraft using a lower speed cruise if you choose to do so, and all the details for that is actually located in that POH I showed you earlier. But honestly, I find it simpler just to fly at a 100% torque. Again, in this universe, fuel is free, so I don't have to worry about it very much. Go ahead and switch ourselves over to navigation mode. And now we're good to go. So we're going to be flying over Egypt. This is basically going to be mostly the Nile River Valley here. We're going to be catching up to that in just a second. The actual big old Cairo is directly ahead of us. We should see some of the pyramids going over. Depending on how good eyes I have today, we're going to have to kind of see how well that goes. For this aircraft, you can effectively climb this thing quite a bit higher than this. You don't have to be this low. I just want it to stay low so we can enjoy some of the sights. And again, look at how much cruise speed we're getting out of this thing. We're getting 262, which is insane for a propeller-driven aircraft of this size. All right, we're going to go ahead and leveling out, and we're good to go. Let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other features of this aircraft while we're cruising today. So first things first, since this is a G3000, I can see that I've got about 13 minutes in order for me to get to my destination. It also gives me an estimated time of arrival, which sounds pretty good to me. The other thing that I really like to play with is you have this neat little button down here. This is Wix weather radar controls. If you press it, nothing happens, which is probably like, oh, that's disappointing. Yeah, that's because they put all that stuff down here. You actually can go to weather mode and actually select the different type of weather. So for example, if I want to put on my weather radar in a horizontal mode, I can click that right here. The weather radar, by the way, is this weird little bubble right here. Now, if I wanted to, I could switch this to vertical mode, which now it's going to show me all the weather ahead of me. Obviously, if you take a look out the window, there's not a lot of weather today, so you wouldn't see anything, and you will not pick up ground signals with this. Now, if I wanted to shut this cool weather mode off, I could go back to NextRad, click on it, and that goes ahead and returns it like that. Now, there's a couple other fun buttons on here, depending on what exactly you're trying to achieve. Of course, you've got your map button, which does nothing. Like I said, that's just going to be doing your weather stuff like this. There would be other features in the real G3000. We also have the ability to go directly to a specific waypoint, or more importantly for us, we're going to go to procedures mode. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the approach I'm going to be flying. We're going to be using ILS for 5. There it is, ILS 5. It gives us the choice of transition if we choose to do so, and I'm just going to press the load and activate button. Now, the moment I do that, you notice this aircraft did this little wiggle. The reason why is now pointing at the waypoint that I need to fly in order to do a successful ILS approach to the particular airport I'm going to. Now, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and change that. If you wanted to, you could even go to flight plan mode. I'll show you a really cool trick with this thing. Go MFD, I can go over to my flight plan, and you can actually add waypoints just by left clicking. So for example, if I wanted to go to like the middle of, I don't know why I want to go back to the United States, because I'm all the way in Egypt. If I came in here and did something like this and pressed enter, I could actually add that as a waypoint in the middle of my flight plan. This flight planning system is so much easier to use than pretty much anything else there is out there. It certainly beats twisting knobs. Let's go back to the PFT. We also have the ability to turn on specific bearings. So for example, if I turn on a bearing for nav1, you'd actually see if we had a VOR selected, you could actually see on here exactly what the particular bearing was. Now, if I want to, we can go take a look at where we just were, since we're heading into Cairo right now. We can dial in the ILS early to go ahead and kind of get some ideas as to how far away that is. So let me go ahead and double check that frequency real quickly while I'm just kind of getting everything nice and organized. Let's see here, 115.20. So now this is a weird thing. How do we set up our navigation radios in this aircraft if we chose to use them? Well, it's not too bad. You want to go to Navcom, and that's going to bring up this fancy menu right here. So for example, if I wanted to go ahead and click on audio and radios now, you have your two nav frequencies right here. So for example, let's go to nav 2, click on it, and then you can just dial in your frequency. So 115.20. Now you can either load it, or you can actually transfer it right away. So now we're currently on nav 2, 115.20. So if I go back to my PFT, set this to navigation source 2, you'll now notice I have this new blue arrow visible that tells me that I'm 43.8 nautical miles away from Charlie Victor Oscar. This is at my nav 2. So as I'm flying in to come to a landing, this would provide me with, again, DME information if you wanted it to. Now, the neat thing here is if you go through this, you'll notice there's a GPS bearing. You'll notice there's an ADF bearing as well. So if we were doing any work with ADFs on here, we could actually get information from it. Now, if it says no data, that just tells you that whatever ADF that you're trying to dial into does not work. Now, if I wanted to, I could set it to the actual Cairo. So if I do a 317, for example, I'll go over to Navcom, audio radios. We're going to scroll all the way down. So we're going to go ahead and dial in 317. Whoop. 0317. Press the transfer button, and now we're on 317. You'll notice that we got nothing as far as identifier right here goes, but we did get a bearing, which interestingly enough does correspond perfectly with where that VOR is, because they're basically right next to each other at the exact same airport. So it actually works really well for us. Other things we can do, of course, if I go back to my MFD real quick, I can go ahead and adjust my range. For example, I can zoom way out and I can see exactly what my little flight plan is going to be looking like for us. In this case, it's kind of an interesting little approach. We basically do the little flippity flip around the outside of it, and then we come back around. I'm just going to go ahead and confirm that real quickly. Yep, you can see all my different places. As a matter of fact, I'd actually prefer, I'm going to go ahead and delete this right here. I can click right here and click on activate leg, and it'll actually change what leg that I'm approaching on at this time, which is crazy because I can go like this. Let's say I want to activate this one instead. So now, of course, our aircraft will point directly towards this position right here, as opposed to where we were going just a minute ago. We can even come in here and delete individual components. It's absolutely wild what you could do with this system very, very quickly and very, very easily, which is, again, why I like it so much. All right, time to start thinking about landing the airplane. Now, we're not too far from our destination. We've got a total of 7 minutes and 30 seconds to get there. We need to get down to about 3,000 feet, so go ahead and do that right now. Now we can go ahead and explore some of the other methods in which we can lose some altitude in this aircraft. Previously, we basically just flew it. So this time what we're going to do is we're going to use the vertical speed mode. So the moment you enable this, it's going to allow us to select what speed we're going to make the aircraft descend at. Since we need to get down to 3,000 feet in 7 minutes, we need to be doing a little bit less than 1,000 feet per minute. So I'm going to press a VS. I'm going to go click this a few times and set it to 900 feet per minute. Now, when you do this, of course, you're going to pick up some speeds. So make sure you go ahead and grab that throttle of yours and pull it backwards. Usually you need to back the throttle on this thing to about 60 or 70%, depending on how aggressive of a descent you're trying to achieve. Now, as we're approaching Cairo here, I'm very interested to see if I can see any of the sights. No promises in that regard. No, I don't see anything yet. All right, just kind of proceed direct here. I'm going to go ahead and flip back to MFT mode. Again, I feel like 90% of my videos are basically staring at some kind of screen. Doesn't surprise me. You can see our active leg is going to be the pink one. That's just a universal kind of rule with this particular system here. And we're going to be crossing directly over, I believe the Nile River is right on our left. Yep. You can see the green from the Nile River Valley right along there. We're going to be very cautious that we don't accidentally crash into something. Even though these mountains don't look that high, usually you get really, really poor visibility from sandstorms and things like that. So we'd have to be careful. So you can see we're coming down pretty aggressively. That little teeny tiny throttle reduction made a huge difference as far as not accelerating too quickly. Remember, if you're under 10,000 feet, you're supposed to be doing 250 knots or less. It's indicated. It says 247. Looks like I'm doing a pretty good job of it. We could actually jam the throttle forward and actually get this thing going down really, really fast. But we're not going to because, once in a while I will follow the rules. Now, one of the coolest things about the Nile River Delta is the fact that everything turns from desert to instantly lush green. It's just breathtaking, especially if you've seen it from the air, from like a GPS satellite or something like that. I should say, a regular photo satellite. GPS satellites don't see much of anything. All right, we're proceeding quite nicely here. You can see we're going to hit this point. We're basically going to take a right and line ourselves in. Notice we've got everything listed as far as what we needed here. I'm just going to go ahead and confirm some frequencies here. All right, let's go ahead and take a look real quickly. I'm just checking, looking at my own little notes. I'm going to make sure I don't accidentally line ourselves up in a really, really bad spot. Because the last thing in the universe we want to do is fly like the wrong approach for ILS or something like that. Just going through all the numbers. They have all sorts of good obstacle clearance here. And it looks like ILS for runway 5 is going to be 1110.9er. If we want to do the center, it's 109.9er. All right, let's go ahead and get that set up. Nav and radios. We're going to go all the way back up to the top. We're going to set this to 10990 transfer. So now we have that ILS frequency loaded in already. I'm going to go ahead and change my information over here. And we should be getting some information. Beautiful. Notice that it automatically gives us the identifier, so we don't have to actually tune into it in order to identify what frequency we're on. What a nice treat to have on any aircraft. So this is going to be our approach here. And you also can see these little blue arrows. I'm actually going to get rid of the one for the ADF because it's actually kind of getting in the way. So we can tell where we need to land is actually slightly to our right in this particular case, as indicated by that particular arrow that's pointing literally to the ILS approach. So we're going to be popping over some mountains here. Hey, I knew we'd get lucky. Nice. As a matter of fact, there should be one on my left also. Yep, there it is. Nice. I might as well enjoy the sights for a minute. Very nice. Very, very, very nice. I'm kind of flipped to VFR mode. This is so naughty for me to do, but why not? Yep, 1, 2, 3. Nice. Cool. All right, let's get ready to land this thing, shall we? Go over to this mode. I'm going to zoom in just a teeny tiny bit. Looks good. We should be approaching that position any minute now. Now, if we wanted to, we could actually do heading mode. Now, the reason I did that is because now I can go back to PFD, flip this to nav 1, and now I can actually see what I need to do in order to safely land this aircraft. In this case, we're approaching a runway 5C. That's going to be the center runway. And you can see presently it's way, way off. I'm basically beaming it. I'm going to be flying directly into it in just a moment. If I wanted to be a little bit safer with this, of course, I could tilt the thing away a little bit to try to line myself up a little more carefully. But you can see what we're actually doing is basically going here and then taking a right. So if I go back to my MFT real quick, flight plan, activate this leg. See how that works? So now we're on that new leg that's lining us up really, really nicely for it. So that's pretty much all there is to as far as preparation goes. You'll notice since we are close enough, we are getting glide slope information already. You'll notice we're already getting information as far as the localizer itself goes. Let's go ahead and confirm some things real quick. I'm just looking at the approach plate myself. I want to make sure everything's okay. Our approach speed is going to be about 100 knots. It's going to end up being about 85 at the end, but 100 knots is going to get us about 500 feet per minute descent. Our minimums are pretty darn good, so I'm not too worried about that particular set. We wanted to set our minimums, of course. We can go back to PFD mode, and there's this thing that says minimums. Notice we have both a radar altimeter as well as a barometric one. A radar altimeter is going to be 200 feet, which now you're going to see your radar minimums visible here. So this aircraft, look how much information we're getting displayed here. So we're getting everything we could possibly need as far as it all in one nice, neat place. And you can also see visually very, very clearly exactly what we need to do as far as our landing. Now, one interesting thing I was mentioning earlier is the fact that we're basically using, our torque goes down as we descend, which is exactly the opposite as the way it normally would be. Now, the other thing I'm noticing is we have a bit of a fuel imbalance going on. Like I can see that my right-hand fuel tank has got 138 gallons to my other one. So I'm actually going to go up here and manually shift it, just like that. So we shift, of course, that helps if you shift to the correct fuel tank. We were on the correct fuel tank. Press that button again. You can actually do this by hand as well if you choose to do so. All right, time to start slowing this thing down. Once we get a little bit closer, you can see there's all sorts of really, really good information here. Normally, there'd be a clear button, so we could clean a lot of this up. In an emergency, of course, we could always come in here and go to nearest and go ahead and pick things. One thing I'm going to do real quickly is I'm going to go to speed bugs. I'm going to go ahead and do my approach speed. I'm going to click the switch, which will turn on a little line here that tells me what my approach speed needs to be. Again, it's so great that everything is all going to be boop, boop, just sort of touch it with your finger and you're good to go. We'll look out the window real briefly, kind of take a look at the nice sights here. Welcome to basically southern Cairo and Giza. That's really neat. Once in a while you can get a really good look at the fort too, but I can't quite make it out today, but that's okay. Just look at how everything just turned green. It's just amazing. Oh, you got the Egyptian Museum off the nose. Ah, that's so wild. Now, I think it's funny that my wifey really enjoys the movie The Mummy. I'm not quite sure. It's kind of reminds me of Indiana Jones, but neat locale, definitely. Definitely a neat locale. And there we go. We have another really, really nice location off the right. I'll switch to VFR for just a half a second here and take a look around, kind of enjoy some of it, because we're going to be landing on all that in just a minute. Okay, now we're just about where we need to be. I'm going to start reducing power almost completely. Zoom in a little bit. I'm actually going to go ahead and arm the approach. We're going to flip on our landing lights. And now it's time to do our approach checklist. Now, the approach checklist in this aircraft is very, very simple. It's GIFY. That's G-I-F-Y. First thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure our gas is on our fullest tank, which it is. We're next going to go ahead and make sure our inertial separator is turned on. We're next going to go ahead and make sure our flaps are in the correct position. We're going too fast for that. And then the Y, of course, I should say the G stands for gear also, so we want to make sure we lower those. So gear/gas, inertial separator, flaps, and yaw damper. You're going to want to make sure your yaw damper is in the off position when you're landing this aircraft. So you can see we've already acquired the localizer. We're going to go ahead and drop the landing gear. We have more than enough speed to do that. As soon as those gear come down, this aircraft is going to go a little nutty for just a moment. All right, we've acquired the glide slope. Still a little fast for flaps, but that's okay. And you can see visually everything's looking pretty good. Inertial separator just flipped itself on. Doesn't surprise me in the slightest. All right, starting our descent. Now, this aircraft, you'll find, is a lot like a sports car. It takes a lot to slow this thing down. It's not like we've got big fancy ceramic brakes or anything to help us out here. Now, I'm completely at 0 right now. Now, one of the neat things, I actually saw a really cool video, and this person was demonstrating a landing with this aircraft. And in that video, you could actually see that your approach is nose down in order to improve visibility. Because, we have quite a bit of nose on this thing. All right, I'm going to start bringing the throttle back in here. I'm going to give myself just a little bit. We want to be approaching at about 85 knots here. Remember, turboprops take a very long time for those engines to spool up, so you have to kind of give them the benefit of everything when you're doing this. There we go. We're about right on 85 knots. We're about 49%. That's too high. Usually it ends up being right around 37%, at least in my experience. All right, looking pretty good. 35, 36. And it's going to be somewhere around here. Again, depending on what your weather's like, as well as your weight and things like that. So we're doing about 87. It's still a bit too fast. Again, this engine is going to take a minute to catch up to whatever power setting you've dialed it to. So you can see right now I'm hovering right around 28 or so. All right. Go ahead and do our checklist one more time. Gas and gear. Looks good. We're going to check to make sure they're down. Should flash at me. Looks good. Inertial separator. Flaps are in the right position. The yaw damper is in the off position. Everything's good to go. Notice, by the way, at the moment I look down, we're all the way down to 82 knots. It just happens that quickly. And I'm also noticing this aircraft is struggling to keep us on glide slope. We're definitely a little on the slow side because that thing just keeps dropping right off the bottom for us. Go ahead and zoom in just a teeny tiny bit here. I'm going to shut off the automatic pilot because it is not doing a safe job of landing this aircraft. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it by hand here. There we go. Just a little bit lower, and we're much better. Right on glide slope. Stick my head up just a teeny tiny bit to make things a little bit easier to see where I'm going. Again, this aircraft is just very, very easy to control. You don't need to do sudden movements in the slightest with this one. There are some that you have to really, really work it, but this one, I don't feel like I need to do that at all. Now, one thing I am noticing as I'm coming in, I'm actually going to pause real quick, is when I set the weather inside of the simulator itself, before I entered into my flight plan here, I had set my weather so it was coming out of 050, but this indicates that it's coming out of 270. So I knew that there was an issue. So I really wish they'd fix this bug because it's very, very unrealistic for it to suddenly change that direction every time I come in for a landing. All right, with that issue corrected, we'll continue our normal approach. Normally in the real world, of course, you want to always make sure you land into the wind. And that quick modification was just because, again, like I said, the flight simulator insists in forgetting what weather you set before you take off. Of course, what we could have done is gone around and landed on the other runway. Yeah, I get that. All right, just coming down kind of nicely. You can see the runway straight ahead. Again, we could have the automatic pilot do this for us, but I'm going to fly it by hand because I didn't trust what it was doing with the glide slope. Like I said, the autopilot in general in this particular aircraft needs a little bit of tuning, and there's a really, really good mod out there that you can find on the flight simulator forums that does all that tuning and tweaking for you in a fairly effective fashion. Now we're getting a little bit below glide slope here, so I'm just going to apply a little bit more throttle. And that's usually more than enough to get us going as far as that goes. You don't have to pull up too far, because again, if you can't see the end of the runway, you've got bigger problems. Now this is another big difference between the real one and the one in the simulator. The real one, you're basically pointing at the ground when you land. It's a very weird feeling, but it's also nice and safe because it improves your visibility. I'm getting bounced around pretty good now. Give myself a little bit of forward trim. Nice. Okay, that's a little bit better. So you can see we're more or less level. One last check of all my settings. I don't want to accidentally land gear up because that could be pretty messy. You can probably imagine why. Whoa. Another quick thing I want to say while we're finishing up our landing here is that whenever you are in situations where you know there's going to be some kind of particulate in the air, such as flying through a cloud, you probably want to confirm that you do have the inertial separator on. Now, one thing I'm noticing here is that my ILS approach seems to be awfully steep relative to what the VASI on the side of the runway says. So I'm actually going to go ahead and fly this one visually for the rest of the landing. Expect my glide slope indication to basically shoot off the top of the roof there. There we go. Looking pretty good. Just checking to make sure everything looks good. We do have a reverse throttle on this one if we choose to use it. It's a very powerful reverse. Make sure you have a button on your joystick to use reverse, though. Don't be scrambling for it. All right, we're pretty close to the runway there. I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle smoothly to 0. We're going to hover over the ground for a second. The aircraft suddenly gets very heavy, and then you just simply hold the nose up until you feel the bump. delightful. If you want to use reverse thrust, of course, go ahead and press the reverse thrust button, then push your throttle all the way forward, and this thing is going to get slowing down very quickly. Alright, that's enough reverse thrust. Go ahead and shut it back off, and we have successfully reached our destination. Alright, hopefully you found that video kind of helpful. Again, we had a little bit of glitches there and a little bit of flight simulator excitement, but again, this is only a 2-month-old game, so a lot of that doesn't surprise me. Big thing with this aircraft is it's very, very powerful, and that turboprop is a little picky, so make sure you kind of keep an eye on that during all of your flight. Other than that, enjoy.